The sun has left.
Your stories don't define you, but how you tell them will. Hi, I'm Sarah Elkins, your host and chief storymaker at Elkins Consulting. When I think about the stories that I share, I think in terms of legacy. I think about the stories that I'm making through my actions and my behavior, and the stories I want to share into my future. And part of that is knowing how I want to be experienced by the people around me so that my legacy is secure and intentional. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately with somebody I love very deeply who is fighting cancer right now. Prognosis is good, but you can't help but think about your mortality when you have somebody close to you in that situation. And just yesterday, I found out a dear friend of ours who was only 62 passed away from cancer. So I think a lot about what my behavior, my actions, what my words will leave behind. And in that, I have the honor of interviewing Sharon Rolph today on the podcast, Your Stories Don't Define You, How You Tell Them Will. I was intrigued by her work when we met on LinkedIn because she was talking about staying relevant into your older years. And I think a lot about how that affects us, our desire, it's more than a desire, our craving to be relevant, to be important, to have something to contribute and to share. And the fact that many times when we don't feel relevant, we sabotage our relationships. And I'm sure Sharon and I will talk about that briefly. But Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Sarah. Our names are linked linguistically, I guess. Sarah and Sharon are derivatives of the same word. So thank you for having me. I think this is going to be a good time spent together.
Absolutely. So, Sharon, our listeners know that I love to start my podcast by asking my guests to share something about themselves that most people might not know about them. And I do that because I know that, especially now, we tend to anchor people into one category. When we meet them briefly, or when we see a post by them, or when we see a comment on social media, we anchor them as a particular person without acknowledging how complicated we are as human beings. And so by asking you this question, we are introducing you to our audience as a complex human being that doesn't do just one thing and is just one kind of person. So what can you share with us?
Well, what comes to mind is kind of a saying that I've turned it into something I laugh at. They say, yeah, years ago, I've done a lot of reading books of personal growth, and people would sometimes in their story say, well, yeah, you're outstanding in your field. I'm out standing in the field. I grew up on a farm, 100-acre farm, and I milked cows and stacked hay and gathered eggs and all that stuff. So it fits for me.
So when you say field, you mean a literal field.
Yep.
I love that. Do you think about that with other people when you hear that they're outstanding in their field? Do you imagine them out in a field with a scythe?
I've never said it to other people, but something that I do, people may know about me is that I've talked often about feeling invisible my whole career. And that kind of relates to that whole topic of feeling relevant. And I think a lot of us women have been too quiet. And I actually, last year, I started hearing a hunger to hear women's voices. About time. Because I wanted to be invisible as a kid. I have learned, well, I have held a weekly meeting for a couple of years called Loneliness to Resilience. In that last year, I was surprised at how much I learned about trauma and other people's trauma and how it can have a flavor impact throughout our whole life. And I didn't realize until I started trying to find clients that I still was invisible.
Oh.
And I even had a conversation just the last couple of days with somebody that we we got together to talk about ego and soul. And I've always I don't have an ego. That's men that have egos.
Not true. They just show up differently for us.
Yeah, and I'm um starting to put my spirit, I guess, around my ego, but I wanted to be invisible because of the molestation that was going on at home. And I thought, if I be obedient, get good grades, don't rock the boat, and maybe I'll be safe. And I realized that hampered. Well, I've used the term tethered my voice.
Mm.
I did do Toastmasters. And one of my favorite memories of life was doing my number 10 speech for being a competent Toastmaster. And I was holding up a book, and the author was an interior designer. And for some reason, I pointed to myself when I said interior designer. I hadn't planned to do that, but one or two of the listeners in the audience caught that similarity of interior design, and that just tickled my heart because I was heard, I was seen.
Right.
Um,
What you meant by interior designer meant your own interior,
yeah,
not the design of a room or a home, but designing your own interior, your thoughts, your mind, your heart, your behavior.
yeah. The author, all I remember is their first name, Alexandra. She wrote a number of books. In fact, I know one was all about writing a letter and how you choose your pen and your paper and your stamp and on and on and on. She made writing a letter, and I think we're starting to move back towards that a little bit.
Mhm. I hope so.
But it was she just wrote it in such a beautiful way, and so she often, in being a good interior designer, she got into your heart, so she knew how to express it in your rooms.
That's the magic, right? I think with any service provider is not telling you what you want, but doing the deep dive to find out what's really below the surface.
Yeah, the reality.
I
So
love that.
I would say just in the last couple months starting to embrace visibility. Oh, I know. Well, let's see, what was it? My new haircut is one of those things. Decided I need a new persona to take. Oh, I got this feeling of I need to take off my invisible skin.
Ah, remove the invisibility cloak, as Harry Potter might say.
Okay, yeah.
hmm Yes,
So
and I noticed you're wearing red during this conversation, and you have lipstick on that's red, and it matches. And that's something that, to somebody who encourages people to step out of their comfort zone and not be invisible, I think a lot in terms of color and what that looks like when you're expanding out of your cocoon into full color.
yeah, so this conversation I had about ego and soul, I'm starting to play with that a little bit in my mind first. And I must have 6 or 8 things on my calendar next week for in-person events. And I said, I'm too much of an introvert and I need to break out of that. And so I actually was telling this lady that I bought outfits over, you know, 50 years to go on dates, and I rarely ever go on dates. And something came up yesterday, last evening, a video that I did. In this corner, I had different things on my wall here, but I had kind of a I don't know that as a sling, but it's got a little bit of sparkle on it and kind of a tiger print to it. And oh, I could wear that next week to all these Christmas things I'm going to because I rarely ever I haven't worn it for 2, 3 years. And so I'm not sure how many of those dating outfits I might figure out how to wear next week, but I'm working on it.
I think that's great. I think a lot of women, especially over 40, feel pretty invisible. And I know that when I am not performing, if I'm just walking through a grocery store, even in my car sometimes, I'm invisible. I've had people just completely cut me off in my vehicle multiple times in a day as if I wasn't there at all. And I think it's the middle-aged woman invisibility cloak that we wear, intentionally or unintentionally. And there are two things about it that have resonated with me. One is sometimes that's okay. Like I've noticed it gives me a luxury that I didn't have in my youth of having this relative anonymity, even a small town in Montana. When I'm invisible, I do different things. I behave in different ways than when I think people are watching me. But then it's also, I have the luxury of putting on my costumes for the bands that I perform with, one of which is a 60s rock band. So I'm in go-go boots and vintage mini dresses, and I can tell you I'm anything but invisible when I'm dressed like that. So I think more of us need to explore that persona of what we would look like if we were on stage. And it can be very uncomfortable, but that doesn't make it inauthentic. It just makes it uncomfortable. You're thinking about outfits. What was that?
Butterflies in your stomach, just get them flying in formation.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Think of it as being more excited and less stress, right? You could change the way that you're framing it in your head. Yes, I feel stressed, but I'm also really excited about the potential here. What's going to happen next? And getting excited about that. So, with your clients, I'm going to ask you to tell me what you do without telling me what you do by describing an interaction with the client that was really, it felt really satisfying to you. And as an example, I had a StrengthsFinder conversation with somebody yesterday. That's my tool that I use for my coaching. And I don't actually have her results in front of me because we were talking about the potential of working together. And I remember asking her a question about how she handled something. And I said, "Oh, you must have analytical in your top talents and probably maximizer somewhere in your top 10." And she said, "Why do you say that?" And I described exactly using her words how that fits into those top talents. And she looked at me and then she was able to look up her results because she had taken it a few years ago with an employer. And she said, "Analytical is my number 2 talent."
Maximizer's my number one.
Oh, I'm not surprised by that at all. So, listeners, so that you understand this, analytical, this is somebody, and this woman also has input, which I pinged as well. Analytical and input together collect a lot of information. That analytical wants to identify patterns and gaps, and they're uncanny in their ability to quickly review data and pull out the relevant information out of it. They read data the way I read a novel. They pull the information out of it just instantly. But what Sharon is saying is the maximizer, which is if I were to give you a gift to represent your maximizer, it might be fancy capers in a jar because capers take everything to the next level. One of my friends describes them as the bacon of the vegetable world. So maximizers always know how to take something from good to great. That's just what they do. And they do it with incredible passion, enthusiasm, and presence. So I'm not surprised at all. Are you thinking about a story that can represent what you do, that can demonstrate it?
Not particularly. The only one that comes to mind is my friend Elizabeth, and the symbol that she used for her spark, which is what I teach people to do, how to know themselves on the inside, because when you live aligned with how God made you, life is like a lot like heaven on earth. And Elizabeth described herself as the sunshine. So a sunflower was kind of her symbol for herself. And how I think that opened her up to both loving herself, who she was, and how she liked to be in the world. She's from Sri Lanka, so she's a very dark black lady, but she designs fabric. She has looms, and she makes and someday when I'm on stage, I want to be wearing an outfit she made for me. I love the colors of a shrimp and peach and maybe a little bit of cream and something that's kind of flowing, while you walk around on stage. And that's her and I coming together in a grand way and feeling so good about ourselves because of what and how God made us to be, just being in this world and being like when you're on the stage, just feeling right and seeing what happens. How beautiful
Mhm.
that is.
Comfortable in your skin is how I
Yeah.
describe that. And I think a lot in terms of when we're comfortable in our skin, then we are authentic no matter how far out of our comfort zone we're standing.
Yeah, when I think I had only been retired maybe about 4 months, and I heard a guy, online that was doing a talk from the UK on how to have mental strength. Oh, that's a new topic. This was 10 years ago. But he said, well, before you go into a meeting that might stress you or you don't know how it's going to go and you're kind of tense about it. He said, well, first recall to mind a warm memory. And I recalled to mind that day I was in 3rd grade. Now, I'd already skipped 2nd grade, so I was a little younger than others in my class, but I had been pegged to be one of the readers for the Christmas program. There were going to be 3 of us, and the rest of the class was going to be doing a choreography thing on the stage. And I think I had at least 3, 4 weeks to prepare, maybe longer, but she didn't tell me how to be a good reader. So I looked around and I thought, well, who's in front of people? Okay, the pastor's in front of people, the newsman on TV's in front of people, and what makes them effective and what makes them good. And so I decided that I needed to speak up so I could be heard, speak slow enough so I could be understood, and speak loud enough. And look at my audience. That was the other thing. And at 2nd grade level, I was figuring this out on my own. So imagine at the end of the program that night, I had 1 or 2 people come up to me and told me I was their favorite reader. They noticed.
That is a good feeling. So all that attempted invisibility suddenly was your superpower.
Yeah, yeah, and nobody taught me. I picked it up on my own, my own level. So, yeah, that's probably where this Queen of Courage might have started.
I believe that oftentimes we have those aspects of our personality, our character, very, very young that show up as early as 6 or 8 years old. And then we start to be really, really influenced by the people around us, and we kind of lose that independent sense of who we are because we're so influenced by the people around us. I do this with StrengthsFinder. I can work with a client and we can identify moments in their youth where those talents showed up strong and then how they kind of got watered down or shifted to try other people's approaches to problems and projects and people, relationships. And then for some reason in our mid to late 30s, we start to come back to that original, this is what makes me special. This is what lights me up when I can do this. So when you think about this Queen of Courage, I'm thinking that what this man was saying this 10 years ago when you watched him speak was look for the evidence of times when you did well. Remind yourself that you've done things like this before. Maybe you've done harder things before. Is that where you were going with that?
Well, what was curious about that, Sarah, was a week or 2 later, I thought, "Why have just one warm memory?" So I got out a piece of paper and listed warm memories. I must have had 8 or 10, maybe 12. The shock came when I realized half of that list was in front of people.
Oh,
Had I been in the wrong career? That that just really made significant impact on me. And in fact, I had actually gotten in the mail about the same time I retired. I'd done a profile. I like profiles because it helps me understand me and you,
mm.
and but I was sure they got this wrong. It said I was an influencer. Where did that come from? I I was sure it was the biggest mistake I'd ever seen. And so it might have been when I realized that list was in fact in front of people that I thought maybe I should take another look at that and take baby steps as if maybe it was true. And that's when, about that time, I got a call from New York City to be on a podcast. And it said, they said they thought, or they'd heard that I had something to say and I had some energy and whatever. And so they actually charged me $1,500.
Oh,
But that was in the early days of podcasting. And and about 4 hours after it aired, you do have energy. We would like to sign you up to be a podcaster." And so I did do, about 25 or 6, uh, audio only, it's on Spreaker platform called Maximize Retirement, and then later I came on with some local ladies and did, audio and video, and that was called Fresh Courage, It's Your Time to Shine. So
oh, I love that. And it just goes along with what I just said about those talents, those internal approaches showing up as early as 6 to 8, then coming back to you later on in life, because that maximizer is in the influencing category of StrengthsFinder. So yes, influencer right there because of your enthusiasm. So tell me, just so that our audience understands the difference between what you were doing in your career and what really lights you up. What was your career? What were you doing for however many years before you retired?
well, years ago, I started working, I put myself through college, and that was just, um in college, I worked in the administration office, working with people's tuition and all that kind of thing. And then, I because my first job right out of high school was working in our, um, little tiny town of maybe 2,000 people at the bank, and I was, posting your checks onto your, uh, statement sheet every night, every day, and, balancing it by hand, and all this. Well, because I'd worked a year in the bank, when I came over here to college in Seattle, I it was easy to get another job at that bank working second shift. This time I was sorting on great big machines all your checks and sending them to Montana and Spokane and Portland. and and from there, one of the guys I worked with, um, started working in Everett at General Telephone, and Bill said, "Well, Sharon, why don't you come up here?" And 'cause, I was probably living yeah, I was living in Linwood at the time, so it was about the same commute, and I wound up working at General Telephone for 19 years from, just working with computers, and I learned programming a little bit, but most of the time I was spent, um, testing code that other people had written or installing code that came out of headquarters. And I eventually did transfer with General Telephone, which became known as GTE, to Tampa, Florida. So I was, behind the scenes. My last job was at Boeing, and I was did work on production floor as a machinist, driving.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant.
I walked in the door at 60 years old. I was told it couldn't be done, and I just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And I have to admit, I look a lot younger than I really am, but um, and they were actually giving incentives to be hired, $3,000 to come in and be hired by the end of September that year. I missed that by a couple weeks, but yeah, I don't let it. I decide what stops me, and
You became a machinist at 60.
yeah, yeah.
Oh
So
my gosh, that is so inspiring. I've been thinking about what kind of uh, manual labor I want to do as I age. When we were working on our house was built in 1890, and it's a brick home in Montana. And in 2013, 2014, 2015, we built raised beds around the front entrance to our home, brick and mortar raised beds. And I did all the brick and mortar work myself. And I loved it. I loved building these walls, and they look so pretty. And now every time, 10, 12 years later, I walk up our front step and I see these beautiful flower beds, especially in the spring and summer when they're filled with flowers. And there's something so satisfying about knowing I built that with my own hands. I love that you're a machinist at 60. That is so great.
one of the things I often sometimes talk about, and I found one of my high school classmates that loves color like I do, and I made a ripple afghan. Well, my aunt had started it for me, and I in those days, back in my 20s, the people were making a lot of ripple afghans, but they were more like yellow and orange and browns, yellow, orange, browns, and cream maybe. And I thought that was boring. So I added red and green. And it turns out those orange, browns, red, and greens look like fall colors.
Mhm.
So it's especially and I made it out of wool yarn. So yes, there is such a good feeling. I have it on my bed. Um, even today, I last year I put it in between my quilt and my blankets, but this year I put it on the top, and so I see all those bright colors every day. So
I love that. I love that. So let's come back to the main point, because this is something that I've been wanting to ask you about and talk to you about, is this idea of relevance into our later years. When you think about the work you're doing, what do you want people to get from those conversations that you have? You mentioned before we hit record that you are 78 this year. And I mentioned that my mom just turned 79 in September. And I we talk about this a lot because she has achiever in her top talents, which means that if she doesn't set thoughtful, intentional goals, she'll set arbitrary goals. And sometimes those arbitrary goals end up having negative consequences. But once she sets a goal, she's gonna meet that goal. So if it's arbitrary and she's not thinking about the consequences of meeting the goal, she ends up paying for it, usually physically, because she's very fit and athletic. So when we talk about the classes that she takes, we talk about the teaching she's doing. And one of the things that she found really brings her great joy, continues to bring her great joy, is when people ask her for help with lactation consulting. So she works with new mothers who are struggling with breastfeeding. And my brother and my sister and I have been sending her friends for decades. How can when I find out that one of my friend's daughters just had a baby and she's struggling with breastfeeding, and I'll say, my mom does these great consultations. Here's her number. Text her. She'll get on a Zoom call with you or FaceTime, and she'll help you.
mm,
And that's how she remains relevant. My concern was always that she was going to consume in order to find her relevance, buy things that she didn't need, fill her house with things that she didn't need. And so when I know she is activating this relevance through guiding women in healthy breastfeeding habits, I am so filled with joy for her. So in that sense, what do you do? How do you guide people toward that same idea of finding their relevance in healthy and contributing ways?
Well, I should have been pulling this up. Yeah, yeah. Um, we have deep inner wisdom about ourselves because we're living in our skin, and most people don't know about it, ask about it, inquire about it. But we take very simple things like things you love to do,
Oh,
things you
keep that up for a second. I'm going to take a screenshot. Okay, thank you. Keep going.
we take the things you love to do, things you like about yourself, your hot buttons. Few people might know about our hot buttons, negative or positive. Your aspirations in about 12 different areas of life, your values. Values make such a difference, just like our strengths do, and then our guiding principles. So, um, let me just slip in here that when I went through this process in coaching class, it was the first thing they taught us. And I'll never forget standing after having completed this process with my classmates, and we were standing in a circle. And I noticed as people were reading their statements, as it came my turn, it's like they were sniffling. Why are they sniffling? Oh, when it came my turn, it felt like somebody had just asked me to define my soul. What a precious moment. Here's what I read. I am precious jewel of wisdom. I am colorful collaborator, motivator, and learner. I am tranquil, authentic, and pure inspirer. I light fires. And when I started living from my core, it took me a couple months before I realized that when I lived from what matters to me, every day felt right. So coming back to relevance, this what first came to mind was this statement. I make these art blocks because I love wisdom. I like collect wisdom. I love color, and I love to sew. So I've made 400 or 500 of these. But have you forgotten who you are? Is a line from The Lion King, and they asked that at the time that is it Simba that had gone away and for years and years, and their cousin or somebody found him and said, "Well, have you forgotten who you are? We are that trombone player from high school, that reader from the school program." And and through all the work and all the, putting a roof over our head and buying our cars and going on vacation, we're still that person inside your skin. So, um, now because I've still been somewhat invisible, um, even until this year, that has not stopped me because never underestimate the power of a planted seed. And I I got that from my conference in Portland, Oregon, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I have decided that whether I'm invisible or not, I can still plant seed. I am going to stake my life and my reputation on planting seed. So you can find 3, 4, 5 years of videos out on YouTube that I've done. I started out doing Instagram by holding up these art blocks and telling people why they should be courageous and live by this thought that I'm talking about today. This one, may you feed a hungry world through me, is feels like a prayer to me. It's the last line of a Bill Gaither song that could in fact become my legacy, feeding a hungry world through the things that we do and what God made us to be here.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm a big believer in having visualization about who you are and what matters to you. So, for instance, when I think about the StrengthsFinder talent connectedness, I always recommend that people have an image that represents how that shows up for them. So, for instance, for me, it's a trail map of a mountain near my home where I know how every trail intersects. So my connectedness shows up in that way that everything is connected somehow. And you take one trail, you're going to eventually end up at another trail, even if it's not directly connected. There are always connections among us. So the idea of your client having that sunflower to represent sun and light. And my business coach once asked a question about that. What's your symbol? What would represent you and who you are? And this is perfect timing because Hanukkah starts the night of Sunday. What is that? December. This coming. Oh, Hanukkah starts on Sunday, December 14th. So this will air after that. And I imagined myself as what's called the shamash, which is the leader candle on the menorah or the Hanukkah that Jewish people light for the celebration of Hanukkah. And when I used to go to my boys' elementary schools to teach about Hanukkah, I would bring dreidels for every student. I'd order them in bulk. And I would go to a local store a local bakery where they would make miniature jelly donuts, which are the Israeli Hanukkah treat. And I'd bring them for hundreds of children every year. One of the stories that I would tell is I would talk about the menorah, which is it has 8 candles that represent the 8 nights of Hanukkah, and it has one candle separated from the others. That's the shamash, and that is the leader candle, or sometimes translated as the helper candle. And we use that candle, we light that first. And then on the first night of Hanukkah, we use that candle to light one candle. And on the second night of Hanukkah, we put 2 new candles in there plus a new shamash, and we light the other 2 candles with the shamash candle. And every time that I would teach this in elementary school and junior high and even in high school, I would remind the students that when you use your candle to light other candles, it doesn't diminish your light. And that for a moment, the spark of the 2 candles together light things more brightly. Mm-hmm. And that it will never diminish your candle to light someone else's. And so when my coach asked me about that, I said, I'm that candle.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yes.
So what is your image? You had one for your client or your friend, that's the sunflower. What is yours?
Oh, it's a ring. In fact, I had a special moment, aha moment, as I was standing in Dallas, Texas, around their Cowboy Stadium. There was a booth back, and it was a Sunday afternoon because I had waited until the end of the event, kind of not really on purpose, but there's a geometry teacher turned jeweler that had a booth at the back side of the stadium, and and I love unique stuff. Maybe that's part of my maximizer.
It is.
But this he had rings. In fact, I just dropped my ring. Um, sorry. He had what he called stackables. He was from Minnesota. And he would put 3 or 4 rings together, and they were so unique that it just something moved in my gut when I put those rings on. What just happened? I took them off and put them on again, and it moved again. I was just kind of bewildered. What's going on here? I remember turning around and starting to walk away, and then I decided I wanted to ask a few questions. And I have pictures of those rings on my dream board. The stackables started then about $10,000. And so I asked about do you ever resell them? Yeah. The lady that, was helping him in his booth worked for IBM, and she had it sounded like she had 2 or 3 sets of rings, and so I'll pick up one later down the road. But had been reading a book shortly after that about describing our contributions to our team at work using some kind of symbol. And so I decided to describe my contribution as being valuable and excellent and um, things that you would use to describe a valuable ring, shiny, quality. Anyway, so I wrote 3 paragraphs about my contribution to my team at work using that symbolism of a ring. And so when it came time to be um, coming up with a metaphor for my contribution to the world, I again chose those rings. So I am a precious jewel of wisdom.
Mm.
And the one of my good friends, she used her symbolism was a hemlock tree in the back of their yard that was huge, and everybody that drove by their house recognized that tree. They're placed by that huge tree, and so the there's a beauty about using a metaphor. I often also call it a parable because there's lots of them, picture stories in the New Testament. So and the beauty that a metaphor, the implication, what we learn from it, can change through the periods of our life without changing the metaphor. It just means something different to us.
I was thinking about the stackable rings. I was remembering, I think it must have been in the 70s, maybe early 80s. They had these puzzle rings that
Mhm.
there would be like 6 rings they were interconnected, and if you took them off, they would fall into 6 pieces, but they were still connected, and you'd have to puzzle them together to put it back on. And that's what I was thinking about when you said your stackable ring. And as much as you were describing the ring itself, maybe the precious stone that's on it, what I was imagining was your connectedness. The fact that what you contribute is how you connect the dots for people, how you make those introductions, not just among people, but the internal introductions back to themselves.
Yeah.
You are reintroducing somebody's inner self to them.
Yeah.
And that's what I was imagining with your stackable ring.
So the relevance is seeing your knowing yourself so good. In fact, I really think it's a key point of being competitive to AI these days is when you know what your spirit and reason for being here. You can stand up to any kind of interview and job interview and say, can you get a spirit or innovation or the reliability that I bring in my body, um, and be satisfied with it on a day in and day out basis?
Mm, I love that. I love that. And even for volunteering as you age and choosing where you volunteer and with whom and what you're going to contribute, same thing. When you walk in, knowing what you contribute, how you contribute, what lights you up, and how you contribute, then no one can turn you down. They just can't.
Just like your mom too.
Yes, exactly. Sharon, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for reaching out to me on LinkedIn. And listeners, just so you know, the links to get in contact with Sharon will be in the show notes on my website, elkinsconsulting.com. They'll be in the show notes for this episode. Sharon, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It's been a delight and pleasure.
Listeners, now it's your turn. What are you doing consciously or unconsciously, to remain relevant in your daily activities? What are you thinking about when it comes to being somebody who matters, someone who contributes? What are you choosing in your life to make sure that you have ongoing relevance, whether that's directly to the planet, whether that's to your family, whether that's to your home, your fur babies, or at your community? I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Thank you so much for listening to Your Stories Don't Define You. How you tell them will.
That's the time you must keep on trying. Smile, what's the use of crying? You'll find that life is still worthwhile if you just smile.